So the idea is like including the umbrella of who gets to participate in menstrual cycle awareness, including other experiences. For me, it's a lot about, including the experiences of neurodivergent folks, but a lot for me of including the experiences of non-cis women or even cis women who have differences that just mean, they don't experience menstruation in the stereotypical way. And so I think when we widen the lens of how we think about menstrual cycle awareness, we just get to include so many more experiences of having a cycle that just, expand our own awareness of our own cycle.
Welcome to Wildflow Podcast with me, Charlotte Pointeau. I'm an internationally award-winning menstrual cycle and embodiment coach, cycle mysteries guide, and founder of the First Moon Circle School of Menstrual Education for Children. Tune in for deep, heartfelt conversations with wisdom keepers, embodied leaders, and change makers on themes from cyclical living in flow with your menstrual cycle and body's wisdom, reclaiming rites of passages to normalize period positivity for you and the next generation, and exploring our embodied experiences, soulful transformations, and intuitive wisdom guiding you to express and embody your full power and the change you want to see in the world. Are you ready? Let's flow. Today's guest, Joeli Carparco, is a mindset and menstrual cycle coach for creatives, content creators, and coaches. She works to bring a neuroqueer lens to the menstrual cycle awareness space by taking the focus off of fertility and even menstruation itself in order to expand the umbrella of who is included and to acknowledge different experiences of having a cycle. Through creating a practice of getting in touch with their body, Joeli helps her clients reconnect with their needs, wants, and desires so that they can have happier, healthier relationships with themselves, others, and their businesses. Joeli's pronouns are she, they, and she identifies as queer and neurodivergent. And I'm very grateful to Joeli for sharing so much insightful knowledge, wisdom, and experience with us in this episode. It's one I hope everyone listens to, whether you're queer or neurodivergent yourself, or are looking for examples and representation when it comes to understanding how you experience your cycle, and whether you're holding space for others in menstrual cycle awareness or the wellness space, and even whether this is something you're listening to and learning about for the first time. Welcome to you all. Joeli and I chatted about how Joeli realized their neurodivergence was exacerbated by their cycle and what it looks like for them with ADHD and autism specifically in life and business. What neuroqueering the menstrual cycle means, what it looks like in action, and why it's important. How the menstrual cycle awareness space usually excludes non-cisgendered and neuronormative people, even if unintentionally, and how that feels for Joeli. How coaches and space holders especially can be more inclusive of menstruation beyond charting fertility and connecting to the womb by using better language and the follow-through, especially if you're not sure of what the right wording or actions you can take are. How Joeli links the astrological signs to expressions of the inner seasons of the cycle. Hello, Leo season. I got so much out of this conversation, and I'm so grateful to Joeli for that. I'm sure you will too. To follow Joeli and their inspiring and informative posts on Instagram, check out at Joeli Carparco and grab a cuppa. Get ready to listen in to this really important and wise conversation and get ready to go with the flow. Welcome, Joeli, to Wildflow. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good stuff. It's really lovely to have you here. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So let's start then, as always, with a cycle check-in. And we'll just share where we are at in our body's cycle, if we have one, and if there's any other seasons or cycles that are influencing us today, and just share that, because I always find it shapes our conversation, and it's interesting to see where we're both at in whether they're similar or opposing parts of the cycle, just as a way to frame this conversation as well. So also, if you're listening, then this is a good chance for you to do your own cycle check-in as well. Think about where you're at as you're listening to us as well. So I'll go first. So in my menstrual cycle, I'm on day 4 today. Thankfully, after a really, really long cycle that's just ended, I've finally had my period. And it's been really nice just to have a chance to slow down. I don't, I don't believe in waiting for your period to slow down. Like you can slow down anytime, but it's also when I feel like I really need it most. So just as I'm coming into it and then during. So it's like the brakes get put on for me regardless. So just to really honor that and like go with it and let it really slow me down has felt really nice. And yeah, day 4 today, still feeling quite vague and dreamy actually, and tired. And I'm at the end of my school holidays here in Australia, so that's definitely part of it. I'm pretty knackered. I'm like, oh, can I just have a bit of space for me? And it's also the new moon today, actually. So I feel like, it's like all of these kind of inward, like dark, slower qualities, and we are in the middle of winter as well here, so everything is pointing towards like outer winter, inner winter. All of these are kind of aligning quieter, slower, reflective energies within me. So I'm coming to you today from that, feeling a little bit like, where am I? What's going on? Like, oh, but like in a nice kind of chill way. So that feels it feels quite nice. Um, so yeah, I think I think that's me today. Just my blood is slowing down, but my body's still, yeah, really, as I say, really, really slow, and it might take a little while to gear up. I feel like after such a big and long cycle that's just passed. So yeah, deep in winter over here. And how about you, Jolie? Do you want to share a check-in with us? How are you feeling? Where are you
Yeah.
at? And yeah, what's going on for you in your cycle?
Yeah. So in my menstrual cycle, I'm on day 24, which for me is in deep autumn. So I normally have about a 30-day cycle. So I specifically scheduled this recording knowing that I would be in my autumn. It's a time when I'm a little bit more focused, a little bit hopefully more on track with my thoughts, but we'll see. But yeah, a little bit just more able to be grounded and focused on tasks compared to other parts of my cycle. So I'm actually feeling really good and like really mentally clear. And that's funny. I felt that way about the new moon, which for me occurred late last night. But also like just felt a lot of clarity about some things. I keep having dreams where I'm explaining what I do to people, and I'm explaining it in a way that feels so clear and like on point. And then I wake up and I can't quite like hang on to it, but I can feel like my brain is working behind the scenes to just really like clarify and hone and like yeah, like revise thoughts around work and what I do and talking about what I do. So that's been really interesting. And then, yeah, for us, my kids are finishing school this week. So there is a lot of like, as I come to the end of my cycle, they're coming to the end of this cycle with school. And we're doing a lot of wrapping things up and tidying loose ends. But then we're also moving into Leo season. Astrologically, that happens on Sunday for us, which as a Leo sun, I just have a whole personality change come the month of Leo season where I'm like, it's Leo season. I am on my throne and I want to be super visible and like super princess. But I think it also just correlates to for us in the Northern Hemisphere having some more sunshine, having a little bit more summer playful vibe. So I'm coming into that as well where I'm like, more ready to play and be out than inward.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. So, Jolie's in the UK, and you're coming into your school summer holidays, and I love what you said about Leo season as well as being an influence on you with your birthday being in that time, but also it corresponding with summer for you. So that's interesting for like us in the South, where it's like we're past midwinter, like we're coming up to Imbolc here in 2 weeks, which is the first Sabbat or like point in the calendar, the wheel of the year that's past winter solstice. So it's the first point it's like not spring yet, but it's kind of like halfway between winter solstice and the start of spring. And it's like that first kind of cusp of like the light's just starting to come back a little bit, and like nothing's growing yet, but it's like planning time to plan out the garden. It's like, seeds are germinating under the soil, even though you can't see anything. So like, I'm just curious, like, how does like, if you got any sense, and you might not, I'm just asking off the top of my head, whether like, Leo season, like how could somebody in the Southern Hemisphere like relate to Leo season? Is there or not so much?
Yeah, so my partner is Australian, and we've had conversations about one day in the future potentially moving to Australia. And I'm like, how will I feel about my birthday being in winter? Because I am solar powered. Like I am such a sun baby. And I'm like, oh, what would this be like? So I'm very curious, and I like would love experiences. If any of your listeners have Leo season birthdays, like what do they feel? But the energy of Leo season, can we still embody it in the winter as we move through? Yeah, well, there is a like welcoming back the light. And I think that feels very Leo to me. Like, as you said, of you're cresting out of winter, still in it, um, headed towards Imbolc. So that would be like the equivalent of our like February 1st. What is that energy there that's present? What is wanting to come to the spotlight? What has been hibernating underground that is like, I am yearning for the sun. You've kept me in the closet. You've tucked me away with all of like your old summer clothes. Like what's yearning to come out into the spotlight is kind of, I think, how I would be thinking about it. Like what in this time of dark, like what it needs to be playful, what needs to be held a little bit lighter. Thinking about like Leo for me is pure ovulation energy, which again is like associated with the season of summer. But I wonder how that would feel of like, I was looking at the image of is like something that desperately wants to be birthed because it's been underground for so long.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I think for me that really hits on something that I identify with about this time. It's like okay, like, are we done with winter yet? Are we done? Like, I've got, these visions and these ideas, and it's like, and so I guess, it's like which one of those ideas is like really yearning and burgeoning rather than the ones that are like, oh yeah, nice to have, but can kind of take their place. And those elements within you as well, like what parts of you are wanting to be expressed maybe this cycle. I think that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think I'm going to really think about that. I don't really know so much about astrology, like beyond just the kind of, the basics. It's not something that I'm like a super kind of knowledgeable in. So, but I really love it. And I'd love to kind of, I tie it more into the cycle, which I know is something that you're into. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Joeli. I'd love to like just before we dive like into the depths of our conversation, just invite you to share with us like what you do and like I guess a summary of like why this is something that is really speaks to you, is like really your passion? Like why do you work in the menstrual cycle realm? And maybe it's a bit about like your story, your identity, like how's this come to be? Do you want to just share with us a bit about who you are and what's brought you to here?
Yeah. So I have been it, running my own business since I graduated university. I never went down a path of traditional employment. Um, so yeah, I've always kind of been entrepreneurial, I think, because I've always been neurodivergent, but that wasn't language I had at the time. Um, and so I've journeyed through many different paths, but coming out of, let's say, 2018, I found myself in life coaching spaces and really, really passionate about coaching because I could see that the people I was working with, like helping folks start their own businesses, could really see like how much self-doubt was holding people back. Like I work a lot with perfectionists, people pleasers, um, and what I call kind of A+ students. So people who did really well in an academic setting. And the thing is about those people, we were given rules about how to be and we followed those rules. So we were given rules about like, you can be perfect, you can study hard and work hard and you can get 100. And then we go out into the real world and we're like, okay, so if I study hard and I work hard and I follow the rules, I like get to be perfect, but we like no one's perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. So I really love working with those people who are in their heads more than they're in their bodies. We think about things, we overthink things. So real perfectionists, people pleasers, because we want to follow the rules. So I work a lot with those people, and I could see that like, yeah, they think they need another course about marketing. They think like, oh, I need to like everything becomes kind of a personal failing. Like if you do a post on Instagram and you're like, but I followed the rules about hashtags and I did my call to action and it's like a really pretty post. Like I followed the rules and I didn't get the result. I must have not done it good enough. And like that's the core belief of like the people I work with is I'm not good enough because things aren't working out or whatever. And so I could just see them like, but you don't need another thing. You don't need another rule. Like it's these thoughts that like I'm not good enough that is actually the thing that's holding us back. So I started Googling like because I didn't know what a coach was. I didn't come from a world in which like I knew anything about coaching. So I started Googling like business therapists, like therapists for entrepreneurs. I was like, maybe I need to become a therapist, but like someone needs to understand like what it is to be an entrepreneur and what it is to be self-employed or like content creation. Cause it's a whole different world, like this world of like being online all the time. Because of how long I've been doing business online, like I started on Twitter. I was there when Instagram came out. I went through like the rise of Instagram, through Periscope, through now we're on Threads. Like I've just seen so much social media and the changes in social media. And I'm like, this is a whole different world. Like if I go to my therapist and they start talking about whatever the things that we talk about in therapy. And I love therapy. But I'm like, no, but you need to understand, like, I just can't send this newsletter. Like, I don't want to talk about all that stuff. Like, I just want to talk about my newsletter. Like, I needed them to understand that and they couldn't. So finally, like, found the world of coaching. And so I started coaching in 2018. And then, we go through all that time and 2019, 2020, 2021, really difficult years. Like I remember 2019. I don't know, like if you're listening to this, think about where you were in 2019. It was a year in which I feel like so many people's like personal identities crumbled. Like who they were, who they thought they were was just crumbling. And we all like kind of went into 2020 being like, this, okay, I like went through this massive thing. I had a split from my partner and it was like, okay, I'm ready. 2021, like or 2020 is going to be my year. Like I figured stuff out. And then we went through like global pandemic. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. So no, we're not figuring stuff out.
I guess
not. And
not.
then we all hit 2021 and we're like, it's going to be better. And then it wasn't. And now we're just, I never try and think of a year is going to be better anymore. But so we kind of moved through all that. And I have these massive personal awarenesses of my own stories of enoughness, my own stories about my own queerness, and like that I had been living, I thought I had unpacked my A+ box, and then I was like, oh no, there was a box within a box that I was like trying to live up to. And so I'd say probably last year, 2022, I was having, how do I describe them? I was having a really rough time, but like I was having a rough time in waves. So I was just like, I had my partner, my ex-husband, and I had fully separated. I was fully living by myself. And there's something that happens like as a neurodivergent person where like you use the people around you to give you structure. And like I can chameleon into other people's routines, other people's rhythms, even other people's emotions. So like I never have to pay attention to myself. And then all of that went away and it was just me. And I was like, I don't really know who I am. I don't always know what I'm feeling, but I was having like days in which I just couldn't get out of bed. I would call them depression hole days. Like I just had no executive functioning and I had like no motivation to do things. And then I would come out of it and I would put back in my systems and I'd put back in my habits and I would feel like, oh, I'm getting this. Like I would feel so close to like, I have my life together. And then it would all fall apart again. And like, I was going to therapy and I was like, I'm like, I don't know what's happening. And we kind of like discussed neurodivergence and ADHD and then stumbled across someone tracking their cycle. And using that as their calendar for the month. So like in bullet journaling, I fell down a bullet journal rabbit hole, which then led me to cycle awareness rabbit hole, as you do. But instead of planning out their month with the calendar, they planned out their month with their cycle. And I was like, that sounds fun. I want to do that. And so as soon as I did that, like literally the first month that I did that, and I started tracking my depression hole days and my executive functioning in alignment with my cycle, I was like, this is not random. This is predictable. Like immediately could see like they're happening post-ovulation every single time. And then there's like another one that like a week before my period is due, where I'm like, the world is ending. I need to burn everything down. It sucks. I'm terrible. What am I doing? And as soon when I was tracking it with the calendar month, they felt random. Tracked it with my cycles, like this lines up. Like this is not random at all. And it just was like the biggest light bulb moment for me of like, I'm not broken, because it was like, oh no, this is not like, I'm not, yes, there's a mental health thing that I can like work on and improve, but it was like, these are predictable. I can prepare for it and I know it's going to pass. And I was like, oh, okay. So then that kind of really started my journey into cycle awareness and really getting to know my own cycle and realizing like how my self-doubt matches up with my cycle, and really like started sharing this with friends. I'm the type of person that like my girlfriend jokes, like I track her cycle in my head. And so she'll be having some, something. And I'll be like, yeah, but babe, like this happens every time you ovulate. And she's like, how dare, like, what, how do you know that? you don't see this? Like I acknowledge your problem and your feelings are valid. And also we go through this every time, like, you ovulate or you do this or whatever. So it's this joke of like, is the world ending or is it day 20 of my cycle? Like having that awareness has just like, it lightens how I feel about what I'm going through. It makes it so I can hold it less like seriously, because I'm really like, well, I used to be like, honestly, what is wrong with me? Like, why? Like, what do I need? What do I have to fix? Like, I kept trying to fix things that it's like, oh, actually, like, I don't need to fix this. I just need to know what's coming and prepare for it. And it completely changed my experience of this real, like, up and down moods that I was going through. And so, yeah, that kind of led me to where I am today, where I realized, like, as a coach, it's really helpful for me to be like, okay, is this self-doubt or is this a week before you bleed? Because if it's self-doubt, then we can coach around it. But if it's a week before you bleed, like, I'm not going to argue with that brain. Like, we're just going to acknowledge the feelings. We're going to sit with the feelings, but they're going to change tomorrow. And so it's not useful to like give attention and validity to stories that your brain's coming up with because of hormones. Like, they're just not real.
Amazing. What a story. That's fantastic. I love hearing that because I can, one, in parts, like I'm not neurodivergent, but relate to that sense of like, oh my gosh, when you start to track your cycle and line things up by your cycle, you can be like, look at these patterns and how it's shaping you. But I'm really interested as well to hear, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation here too about like specifically what that looks like for you as a neurodivergent person, where it's coming up for you predictably, and like what it looks like and feels like, and how you've learned to work with that. I think that's just such valuable like insight for anyone who's listening, who's like, oh, that's me, you know, like this is something that like you're talking about, and you know, really we really need to be talking about, because it is a different experience to somebody who is not neurodivergent. And you know, I also think, and I'd love to ask you, like, do you find that this is something that is quite common for people with, you know, like, it's, you know, say you have a specific diagnosis, like for example, do you find that it's like quite, you know, like, oh, okay, you have ADHD or you have autism, like, so therefore you're likely to have experience your cycle this particular way? Or do you find like it's really different person to person? You know, we are all obviously different things going on in our lives and worlds, but do you find there's like these sort of predictable like experiences that can be like across the board for people?
Yeah, I do find that like when I talk to neurodivergent folks just in general, like they immediately resonate with a lot of things. And so obviously, like you said, it's a spectrum and everyone's different. And I'm not so sure about the difference between like, oh, if you have ADHD, it's this, but if you have autism, it's this. I more think about because also there's some talk about like potentially ADHD and autism are like on their own spectrum, like maybe not even, they're definitely separate diagnoses, but more connected than we think. But what I think it is like if you are prone to overstimulation, or like if you are like sensory processing differences and parts of your cycle in the same way, because that's my experience of like so just going through the cycle, like I would say in my winter when I'm bleeding, I actually find that to be a really calm time for me. And I don't know if that's like universal, but like whatever the hormones are doing at that time, which I know what they're doing, but it's not important. My body reacts really well to that. Where I'm like quite calm, quite creative. But what I have noticed is it's a big picture thinking time. So don't ask me to make small decisions. Give me literally a big piece of paper and a marker so I can draw out and dream big. And my thoughts are not linear, they are scattered, but that helps me with like really big pictures and like really big connections. So for me in my winter, it's a really good time to plan out the rest of my month, or like to plan out like a workshop I want to do, but I'm not planning details. I'm just like coming up with themes and like, oh, this might play into this. So, but what I really had to give myself was the tool of big pieces of paper, because I just like, I can't make things line up. I can't like just write notes. I have to like draw Venn diagrams and spider webs and things like that. Moving into my spring, I start to be more chatty. So it's a time of like voice notes will be like 10 minutes long. But I might be like more chatty on social media. Social media posts might be easier to write. Starting to feel good, but I can also have a lot of ups and downs in spring. And I know a lot of folks, and maybe this is neurodivergence, maybe this is not, but like that anxiety, that overthinking can come in real hard in spring. And then as I move towards summer, as I move towards through ovulation, that's when, for me specifically, ADHD tendencies ramp up. So I am like, have the attention span of like 2 minutes. Like it's the time of like, I will be in the middle of a task and then I will get distracted and open another thing. And then 2 hours later, be like, oh my God, I was in the middle of grocery shopping and I like never checked out the cart. Like it's really hard. So I often like don't work in like I book out my ovulation more than I'll book out my bleed. Cause I'm like, I just can't sit at my computer. I can't, I just will not have any attention span. But what I have noticed recently that I've been tracking is I also get really excited about things, but I'll want to start like 10 different projects. And it's actually something my partner and I have noticed, where like we have a tendency to really overestimate our capability in summer and be like, yeah, we can like go to town and do this thing and do that thing and then come home and make like a 4-hour like dinner that, you know, it's something that's super complicated. And then we'll do this. And then we get to the end of the day. And if we're not careful, we'll feel bad that we didn't get everything done. But then like objectively, I'll be like, we were never going to get all of that done in a day. Like, we can't do all of that in a day. So there's a real tendency to like, for me especially, I really caught it this past summer, or my past ovulation, where I was like, oh my God, I want to start this and I want to launch this and I want to do this. And I was like, no, we made a commitment back at the beginning of the cycle that we were doing one thing. So yeah. And the closer I get to ovulation, the more prone to overstimulation I am. So going to shops, everything's too loud. I become almost more withdrawn and more insular, and I can become, and this may be more of an autistic trait that people might recognize in themselves, more prone to like shut down because everything's so loud. Like I just like won't even want to talk because it's so much. And then we move into post-ovulation dip. And that is the hardest part of my cycle for me, in which those are the days I have no executive functioning. And so what that means for people who are unfamiliar, honestly, for me, it feels like having the flu, but like physically I feel well, but it's that feeling of like, I'm lying on the couch and you could drop, 200 pounds in front of me and be like, all you have to do is get up off the couch and you can have this money. And there is not a single thing I can do to get off the couch. Like, I'm like, I would look at it and be like, yeah, cool. I know I want to do this. I know I want to get up off the couch, but I just can't. And so those are days, where if I prepare for it and have compassion for myself, I'm like, cool, we're just not going to get anything done today. But those are also days where like, actually, if I have a commitment on the calendar, so like if I like have to leave the house for something else, that can help. Or ask a partner, ask some supportive people to be like, hey, I just need someone else to like help me get into motion. Those are also that time period I found giving myself physical tasks to do, tasks which are geared towards, for example, cleaning, where it doesn't quite matter if like I start cleaning the sink and then get distracted because something has to get put away. Like actually it helps get the job done if I like have that 2-minute focus. That can be really good for me. And like I said, like I'll, clean the house, something physical because that helps burn off some of that excess energy. And then as we move into autumn, super focused. Like this is my hyper focused time. I can work like long hours. Again, something to also be careful of because it can be like, oh, I worked a 10-hour day and I didn't give myself a break, but I'm just like in the zone, hyper focused. So it's a time of really implementation for me of everything. Like if I'm delivering a workshop, it's the time where I'll do all those last minute details. I'll write up the notes, like something that just needs just that. Yeah, I'll think that focus, that drive, that like, cool, we're detailed, we're getting this done. And then, yeah, as I move towards the end of autumn, I think that's just when like physical tiredness, it's more like, I feel like less anything to do with neurodivergence and more just that normal physical tiredness comes in, that really slowing down until my bleed starts. And then I'm like, oh, cool. Like hormones are coming back. I feel better again.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. That's so helpful. And yeah, it's interesting. As I was listening, there were parts where I'm like, oh, I recognize that quality in myself at that time. But then obviously other parts where it's like, something that is very much not something I experience, and like obviously something that is part of your experience. And then also times where it's like, yeah, I can kind of relate to that, but like yours is like a real amplification of that quality. So it's really obvious that, like having cycle awareness as a neurodivergent person, or someone who's holding space for neurodivergent people as well, because, a lot of people listening to this are doing that. Like having that awareness of, one, like very broadly, like again, everyone experiences the cycle differently. But like two, like how differently and where, and maybe it's not like where you expect it to be or what you expect it to look like, and how it can vary, as you said, like based on, a spectrum like approach. And just simply like, each person is going to like feel it differently, and then it will be different in the application as well, like depending on who you are and what you're doing in your life. Like I'm really loving the examples you've shared of like both like in your personal life but also in the work you do, and how that shows up for you. I think it's, I'm hearing in you that it's just like a really powerful tool. So yeah, it's really great to hear like just what that's like for you. Thanks for sharing, Joeli. And I love the term that you've shared with me, which is neuroqueer. Could you just share, like, for anyone who's like, what's that? Not heard of that. Like, what does that mean to you as an identity?
So neuroqueering or neuroqueer is a term that came from Nick Walker in her 2008 grad paper. And so it expands on the idea of like queer theory or queering something, and kind of combines the experience of being neurodivergent and being queer, which there is a very big Venn diagram of those identities, like neurodiversity in queer people. It's like so much more common than in non-queer people. But from like the kind of vibe of the term, or like how I think about it is, and also part of Nick's definition, is the idea of expanding beyond the standards of neuronormativity and heteronormativity, in order to give more, in the definition, Nick says, give more full expression to one's uniquely weird potentials and inclinations. And I kind of love that. It's the idea of like expanding just beyond the norms. Like there is a very heteronormative and neuronormative way to look at the menstrual cycle. And that's, the typical, there's a man and a woman in a relationship. The woman has a menstrual cycle. She's probably tracking because she wants to get pregnant. Now we might talk about not wanting to avoid pregnancy, but that's even in of itself like a almost queering of it. Like the very norm is like, we use this to track our fertility, and that's how we speak about a lot of things. And so the idea is like including the umbrella of who gets to participate in menstrual cycle awareness, including other experiences. For me, it's a lot about, including the experiences of neurodivergent folks, but a lot for me of including the experiences of non-cis women, or even cis women who have differences that just mean, they don't experience menstruation in the stereotypical way. And so I think when we widen the lens of how we think about menstrual cycle awareness, we just get to include so many more experiences of having a cycle that just, expand our own awareness of our own cycle.
Yeah, I agree. That's awesome. And I love the definition that you shared. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really interesting to hear. And then I love what you're saying, about just broadening the lens and including more people who get to participate in menstrual cycle awareness beyond fertility, and also obviously beyond just like the standard like experience. Like if you pick up a book on menstrual cycle awareness, it's like, for anyone, it's like, here's how you're going to experience your bleed time. Here's how you're going to experience your ovulation time. And actually it's really wide. And then add on the lens or the experiences of, different identities as well. And I'm just hearing how broad and different that can be. And also obviously that it can feel quite like exclusive to like people who are cisgendered, neuronormative, is that the right way of saying it? Like these sort of like, I guess, the dominant identities in culture. Is it okay for me to ask you, Joeli, how have you felt or found these narrow definitions or like descriptions, or like, the kind of archetypal, like, this is what menstrual cycle awareness is, like, how has that excluded you?
And I think it's tricky because there's a part of me that wants to like people please and be like, I felt excluded, it's fine. But like letting that part take a back seat. There's a lot that, like, when I explore particularly menstrual cycle awareness spaces where I'm like, oh, you don't want me here. Like, this is not for me. This information's not for me. Or specifically, like, you don't want people like me in here. And by that, I mean, so I'm still playing with labels, and there's like a piece in me that's like feels maybe nervous to claim like a non-binary label. I tend to think of myself as like gender agnostic, where I'm just like, I just don't buy into the concept of gender as prescribed by society. And I think I experience what's called social dysphoria sometimes with my gender, which means that I feel so comfortable in my body. Like, I don't have any body dysphoria. I feel very comfortable with calling myself a woman, with like, my girlfriend or calling me her girlfriend. Like, I feel very comfortable with that. But then when I'm in a group of what reads as cis women, cis straight women particularly, and they're like, oh, I'm so happy to be in this group of women, there's something in me that feels like that I'm not that. Like, when you say when those in those groups, when they're using the word women, I'm like, I don't know that you're including, if your definition of women is as expansive as my definition of women. And so then that can feel, it feels essentially very dysphoric, where I'm just like, oh, I'm not comfortable with you calling me that. So the best way I can describe this is, I previously was in a relationship with a man, a hetero relationship, kind of, I guess. But I really didn't like the term wife. And I was like, I just don't know about this. Like, I just feel kind of weird, like being called a wife. And what it was is because my box of wife, what I thought what a wife should be, was married to a man, cis, straight, kind of even still have some ideas of like, being the primary caregiver, putting family first. And I was like, but I'm quite ambitious, and like, I love the work I do so much. And like, that's kind of my priority. And I'm not always very soft and maternal. And I love my kids, don't get me wrong. Of course, I love them beyond anything, but I'm not a person who's like, my kids are my whole life. Cause I'm just like, that's just not how I feel. So there were a lot of ways that were just like, oh, I just don't feel like I fit in this box of wife. The minute wife became married to a woman, and like that wife was a woman married to another woman, like that, I'm like, oh yeah, that feels fine. Like the minute wife became a queer term, it fit me. And so it's not, it's like less about, I don't know what the question was, but it's like less about the words and more about the feeling and the box. And so menstrual cycle awareness feels like the box is very small of who we're talking about. We're talking about women who have wombs. We're talking about women who want to access the feminine. We're talking about women who, you know, just have this very, sometimes very soft, very pastel, there's a very particular, a lot of times she's white, a lot of times she's thin, and a lot of times she's cis, she's straight. And it's a very small box of who gets to be included in that wellness space that then I can just like, I'm too big for this space. And so I'll just like, yeah, you just feel like, oh, you're not talking to me. Like you don't know my experience. You don't recognize my experience. And yeah, that's kind of how I feel about traditional hyper feminine menstrual cycle awareness spaces.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's really important to hear. And thank you so much for that part of you who wanted to be like, no, it's fine. letting that part of you just take a seat and go, it's okay. Like, I'm glad that you felt able to share with us your truth.
Yeah.
That's really powerful to hear and to witness and to learn from as well. And yeah, so I'm hearing then, so it's almost like I heard this said about inclusion is that like if you don't actively include, you're automatically excluding. So like I think what I'm hearing is that like unless somebody is like making a stand, like, you know, defining the box as a broader box, then it can come across as like this narrow, like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm welcome here. I'm not sure if you have an understanding here of the fact there are people here who have bigger and broader experiences and identities, and because you haven't actively included, I'm not sure I'm safe, and I'm not sure I'm included, and therefore I'm not sure I'm safe. Yeah. Does that feel
That's
true?
exactly it. Yeah. That it feels exactly that, of just kind of just, and sometimes I feel like, oh, well, this might be unfair. And, you know, I also want to say, like, there's nothing wrong with those spaces. Like, I'm not being like, oh my God, no space can be like that. Of course they can. It's just that I'm going to then make the assumption that it's not a space for me. And I'm absolutely fine not having spaces that are for me. Of course, like, there are going to be a lot of people who don't feel like they fit in the spaces that I create. And that's totally okay. But what I think what my thing is, I'm like, oh, I don't see, and honestly, I don't really see any spaces where I'm like, oh, you're coming at this from a really queer lens. And so yeah, there's that thing of like, oh, okay, you're not actively like trying to be inclusive with anything. So I'm just kind of going to assume that like, I'm not probably gonna feel very comfortable in that space.
Yeah. Okay. And so what would help you to feel included? Like genuinely, and not just like, you know, tokenistic wording, or, you know, like, what is there something that people can be aware of, I guess is what I'm thinking of. You know, and not, like you say, not all people are going to be right to hold spaces for identities other than their own, simply because they won't be able to do it justice and hold that safe space for you. But like, what can people be aware of, you know, if they're wanting to really let people know that they're there, they're doing the work, they're, you know, able to, or whatever that is. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing is just check in with yourself about like, what do I mean when I say the words I'm saying? And like, who do I want to hold a space for? So like one of the things that I see a lot is, let's say you say, I help women with their menstrual cycles. Or no, that's not quite right. Let me think. I hold women's spaces where we reconnect with our cycles. That's a little bit more broader language, right? If I And then she's like, okay, cool. So trans women are women, and it's a trans woman comes to that space. But then if you're in that space, if you're holding that space, and then you're making assumptions like that everyone here has a womb or everyone here has an experience of having a menstrual cycle. Like you can say the right words, but then when we go into the space, like, are you still holding that really inclusive lens? So that's often what I see. I'll read people's sales pages and they'll use language like, oh, I help women and people who bleed. But then go on later to use very specific language that I'm like, oh, no, you don't. Like I saw one sales page for when I was browsing for cycle coach certification. And they said, this experience is open to women and any people who, no, it said all women and I think maybe people who bleed or something like that, non-binary folks. But then their prerequisite was you have to have experience of a menstrual cycle. And I was like, so you don't mean you're open to all women, because there are so many women who, for whatever reason, have not experienced a menstrual cycle. And so I'm like, why don't you just say like, oh, I really just want to work with cis women. Like, so there's things about that where I just get so wound up where I'm like, oh, you're trying, you're using the right language, but you're not really following through on that. So that's more of like a what not to do. I think the things that make me feel included is using like, who is this for language, like in your, copy or sales page, and or what we believe in this space. So like things like we believe that all women are women, and that having this certain experience doesn't qualify you or disqualify you. Like we acknowledge trans rights, like actually stating really clearly, like, this is what I believe, and being willing to lose followers, or turn away right people or something. Like, in these spaces, we respect all gender identities, and then following through. So like when someone is in your space and then being like, oh, I'm so happy to be in this group of women, just having just a gentle reminder that not everyone in this space might identify as women. And so we're going to try and avoid that language. Like those are the things, like that follow through. Making it a habit that in your groups, people introduce themselves with pronouns, because often what can happen is no one does. And then the one person who maybe doesn't use she, her pronouns has to stand out. Like I've been in that place where I will fall back into people pleasing and just be like, and not introduce myself with pronouns, because no one else did it. And so like, it's things like that of, like being an advocate for, like acknowledging, not making assumptions about the people in your spaces and what their experience is. I think, makes a really big difference. So it's like less for me about, using this specific language or, always using the phrase women and people who bleed, and more just about like really being clear about your values, and being willing to like, I know there can be people who get pushback if they use the phrase women and people who bleed, and, you'll get your keyboard warriors who are like, blah, 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 blah. Being willing to be like, yeah, okay, this is fine. Like I know some people are going to disagree with this, but I actually like am using this language not because I should, but because this is, how it is.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. I really appreciate that. I love the specific examples you've given as well of what you've noticed, on sales pages, in groups, and how like then that's influenced your behavior, and like what it takes to actually do this with integrity and not just like token gestures. I think that's super, super helpful. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And I really, yeah, like I was just thinking when you said that, like I had an experience only a couple of weeks ago where someone said, I think you spelt women wrong. And I'd written people in relation to
Oh,
people who bleed. And it was like, you
yeah.
spelt women wrong. I'm like, no, not, let me state it
Yeah.
again. But the people at their back. Not everyone
Yeah.
who's a woman and not all women bleed, la, 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 that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh, okay. And it seems to be like a real um I don't know if this is UK based, but I've been hearing stories, particularly out of the UK, and perhaps more so there than what I've noticed here in Australia, where there's a lot of like heat in the moment about like gender and like women's spaces and the use of, the word like moving away from women and like, being like more inclusive beyond that. Um, and yeah, I'm just curious as well, like because I know there are people who, and there are people who I've worked with who want to do like the right thing, who want to do this work, who want to like really learn to hold these inclusive spaces, but are also like are picking up on what's happening culturally, where there's this real like panic about the erosion of women's spaces. And you know like I've got my opinion on that, I guess, but I would just love to hear what you like, how that like what it means when we use language beyond just woman and women, and like what's going on in that kind of sense. Like, can we say women, you've said women and it's like we don't need to stop using the word woman altogether because people do identify that way. But it's not just limiting it, it's like taking this more additive approach of beyond just that. But like, do you have any thoughts on, if someone's listening and like are curious, or like, kind of sitting on this place of like, how do I kind of reconcile this maybe? Like,
Mm,
what are your thoughts on this?
yeah. So I have like a real nerdy response to this. I feel like I should preference like I'm a Virgo rising. Sometimes I'm just very practical with my language. So I come at this from like just a very practical like approach where if I mean people who bleed, I'm going to say people who bleed. If I mean people who have uteruses, like that's what I'm going to say. If I say women and people who bleed, then like I have confusion about that phrase because I'm like, do you mean women with uteruses and people with uteruses? Or do you mean all women and then just people with uteruses? And like, why are we talking to all women, but then only people with uteruses? Like, not, let's say, non binary folks. So you mean you work with all women, but just non binary folks that have uteruses? Like, it gets more confusing when you try and dissect it. Just say the thing you mean. But I also think about like, so if you think about math, we have like rectangles and squares, right? Like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. But if I just talk about rectangles, no one's out there going, oh my God, that's square erasure. Like squares still exist, even when I'm just like, oh, okay, rectangle this. Like people who bleed is a bigger box. Like it's not erasure, it's just a bigger box. Like under the category of people who bleed are women who bleed and non-women who bleed. Like it's just a widening of the box. It's not in my like there's nothing about it that feels like erasure to me. And the thing, what do I want to say about this topic? Because it's such, I think what can happen is people feel like the opposite of patriarchy is feminine rising. That and so we have to reconnect with the feminine, and that we have to like women need to rise. But like that's not the opposite of a patriarchy. Like the gender binary comes from patriarchy. The idea that women are soft and men are hard, like it's still patriarchy nonsense. Like the more you buy into like women only spaces in the sense that like any, non-binary focused folks are threatening to that, like the more you're buying into old standards of gender. Like so if you really want to like subvert the current systems, like expanding those lenses is how we do that. And I think there can be, but I think there can be an attachment. And this is such a conversation, like a whole other conversation that I don't want to go down to, but I think what I feel is when we attach so much to one specific lens of a woman, and this is how I feel honestly about things like reconnecting with the womb, like when we attach that's where our power is, then of course we're threatened by a woman who doesn't have that same thing. We're like, well, how can you come take our power because you don't like. So we need to just like let go a little bit and be like, no, it's not this binary. And it's not taking, it's like you said, it's not taking anything from women only spaces, which are still fine. You can still have them. No one's saying you can't. But yeah, we're not taking from that experience by being like, hey, some of us are non-binary and we still have periods and like, that's cool too. We're just really subverting the same systems like that. We're all on the same team, as I guess what I want to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. I learned, I feel like I've just learned a lot from that as well. Like really hearing that, I've sort of struggled with the language as well. It's like, how do I take this approach that like is inclusive and I do welcome people, like all people who like want to come along to a particular space, but like doing that in a way that is going to feel welcome to someone rather than like, I think getting it wrong. I think a lot of people are worried about getting it wrong as well. I hear that a lot. And so I really love, what you just said there, like, almost if you've got like a hierarchy or like a subcategory kind of thing where you've got like people who bleed, and then like you say with underneath that, like you've got women who bleed and then non-women who bleed, and it's like, take that like zoomed out like or higher level approach. I'm just visualizing in my head. It's kind of like zooming out, that's probably the right expression. And I just feel like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I always ask people to like think about what you're saying. Like, so like when people are in a group and like they say like, oh, I'm so happy to be in this group of women. What do you mean by that, by women? Do you mean I'm happy to be in a group of women who have vulvas or people who have vulvas? Because that's kind of weird. Like, why are we happy to be in a room with the same genitalia? Like, so what are you actually saying? I'm happy to be in a room of people who have the same lived experience as me. I'm happy to be in the same room with people who understand what it is to not be respected, to feel less than. That's such a more powerful, like if I'm in a space and someone says, I feel so comfortable being in a space of all of you people who, have the same experience as me, then we're connecting over something. But when you just say, oh, I'm so happy to be in a group of women, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, because like it's just not specific. So just really think about, what is it I'm trying to say? What is it I'm trying to communicate? And I think you'll find you connect better with people when we go beyond a binary gender label that doesn't mean anything, because the word what falls under the umbrella of women is so wide and so vast. And, even in terms of like body parts that we have, it's still so wide and so vast. And the thing that I always think about is, okay, so we say, we have this definition of women, and then she goes and gets a hysterectomy. She's still a woman. She goes and she has breast cancer and she gets her breast removed. She's still a woman. So you're like, what are you really saying when you're like, oh, this counts, but this doesn't? And how does that then affect your own experience of like going through menopause, going through, uterine or breast cancer, God forbid? Like when we attach to specific things, like those things are going to unravel. So yeah, that's kind of my thing. Just think about what you really mean.
That's brilliant advice, because what comes to mind is like, it's like values based as well, like lived experience,
Mhm.
yes, like, shared interest maybe, but like you're usually in a space because you have the same values as the people there. And it's, that's what's connecting. And that goes across gender because, just because got two women in a room doesn't mean that they remotely get on with each other or relate
You're
in
right.
any way or share the same values. So yeah, I'm sort of like feeling into that for me as well. And yeah, just that point about, tying gender to like having periods, menstruation, um, being cyclical, all those things, like tying it to gender. Like I see it a lot as well, like, in the like menarche space, like supporting children. It's like, when we talk about it as like becoming a woman, like entering
Mhm.
womanhood, like that for me is like such an example of where we're really, really tying, like, a child turns a certain age and they have a period and now they're a woman, and like all that loaded meaning, but yet it's
And we're
just
giving
not.
that to 12-year-olds? Like,
Totally, I know. Yeah, and I don't agree with that. I don't agree that you become a woman at 12 when you have, if or whatever age you have your first period. Like I feel like, I've only just become a woman in the last,
mhm.
like, when I think when I had children, and not again to
Mhm.
gender it, but in that sense of maturation. And when I say woman, I mean adult,
Mhm.
like grown up.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
when we're tying it to, um, like puberty, yeah, I think I think we're it's almost like a cop out of like, it's like a one word, or a quick, almost lazy way of saying, like this person is entering like a different, like they're transitioning in a way, rather than like again saying what you mean by it. So I
Mhm.
can just see all these different examples that I think we can be really mindful of. Working in this space, being in this space, like existing in our bodies, and just being really thoughtful about how we can actively include a broader definition. Because I think when we resist this as well, like, children, I'm really noticing are really like, they share pronouns, they understand gender is on a spectrum, as well as neurodiversity and all these other things. It's like, we're the ones who need to keep up with the
Yeah.
times. But it's kind of like when you look at, the elderly now, and they're like, I have no idea how to work this computer. Like, can you do this for me? It's kind of like we're that generation of like going, can you just explain this whole, thing to me? And the
Yeah.
kids are like rolling their eyes going, come on, keep up. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's, like I say, I think it's something that we need to be learning about, if it's not something we've lived the experience of. But also I hope that this conversation really helps anyone listening who's like, trying to maybe like express their particular experience or identity, or like make space for themselves in this, I don't want to say industry, but like in this space of, like you said, well-being, or like more narrowed down, like menstrual cycle awareness. Because, it is, um, offered as a very gendered thing. So, yeah, I hope it's helpful for people as well. Um, yeah, so I think that's just been an awesome conversation, Jolie. I really appreciate your time. I
Thank you.
appreciate so much your sharing, your teaching us. I'm really glad that we've been able to have that chat. Is there anything else that you would like to leave people with that hasn't been said?
No, I think we covered so much ground. And yeah, I welcome anyone to reach out if they have questions or if something came up for them that they need holding space for. Like, I am open to, and even if it's just, I don't understand anything you talked about, I am open. If you're open, I am open to having those conversations. So yeah, I hope this at least gave some people some things to think about.
Mm, thank you. Where can people find you, Jolie? Where's the best place for them to get in touch?
Yeah. So you can message me on Instagram. It's at Joeli Carparco, or you can email me, Joeli@queercyclecoach.com. The website is coming, which will be queercyclecoach.com, but that's not in my zone of genius. So the best place is honestly just email me or find me on social media, and have a chat in my DMs.
Amazing. Thank you. So I'll pop those links in the show notes so you can go and chat with Joeli and follow her beautiful and really inspiring and really like I feel like you really bring like a real level of truth and like to your posts on Instagram, and I read it and I'm like I learn from it, but then I also just like get this real strong sense of like you really know yourself and you know how like you know who you are and how you experience not just your cycle but all things, and I think that you're doing amazing things. So yeah, go check out Jolie's work and yeah, follow along and give her a message if you want to. All right. Well, thank you. And on that
Thank you so
note,
much for having me.
yeah, we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Wildflow. I love having you here. If you're loving this podcast, please show your love by leaving a review and a rating, and share your fave episodes with those who you think would love to listen to help share this passion project of mine with the world far and wide. To take the next step and learn how to live, love, and lead in flow with your cyclical nature, or for deep guidance and support in your cycle embodiment journey, discover my freebies, online journeys, trainings, and coaching on my website at www.charlottepointo.com. Until next time, go well with the flow of your body's cyclic nature.